for the dear Americans, the Atlantic Ocean is not wide enough to keep America safe from the same problem or same problems which Europe suffers from because of the migration. If you Americans don't get your act together against the migration, your fate will just look at Europe today. This is what you're going to get in America. Because what you see today in America is what we saw in Europe 15 years ago, when Islam started to come and to organize itself in universities and so forth. If you want to know how America might look like, look at Europe today.
This exclusive interview is brought to you by rarefoundation.com. This is Vlad with rarefoundation.com, and we have the singular honor of speaking with Dr. Mordechai Kedar, a professor of Islamic history in a university in Israel. Actually, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, could you just give us a little bit of your own background and professional credos?
Well, I was born in Tel Aviv 73 years ago. Grew up in a family which didn't even speak Arabic. But in school, I studied Arabic, and therefore I went to the Israeli intelligence. I was there for 25 years in the 8200 unit, which is like the American NSA. And after this, I started an academic career at Bar-Ilan University. I wrote my PhD about the linguistics of the Syrian press under Hafez Assad, who was the president between 1970 and 2000. And I joined the academy as a teacher at Bar-Ilan University until 4 years ago when I retired. In addition to all this, I also in the Arab media much, since I speak Arabic fluently. And I'm an advisor here and there to all kinds of authorities.
Well, fair enough. And I have seen you debate Islamic scholars on Al Jazeera and have handled, let's call it, I mean, I could call it the Islamic dialectic or taqiyya, but certainly a very, very distinctly different spin on history and ethics than Westerners would have on it, and you did an astonishingly good job with it. So what I wanted to talk to you about was, well, there's a number of topics. One of them is pressing, and that is the imminent potential election of a Muslim and communist as the mayor of New York City, and that would be Mr. Mamdani. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts or comments about that specifically and what New Yorkers might expect in the very likely event that he becomes the mayor.
Well, taking over New York is only one milestone in a long way of Islam to spread all over the world. As we see it already in France in many places, we see it in Britain, we see it in Germany, we see it in the Netherlands. And yes, we see it also in Dearborn, Michigan. And, town by town, city by city, their objective is very, very well known, especially to those who are delving into the Islamic thought. We actually read about this in their own document, what they call the explanatory memorandum, which was found in the 90s, which is actually telling us all about the Muslim Brotherhood plan for America, how to Islamize America. So the Big Apple will be devoured by Islam, and for them it will only encourage them to continue on every other town and every city, and finally it will be in Washington, D.C. after they had already a president with Islamic roots. So it is possible, and as he already said, yes, we can. And this is how they relate to this. Yes, they can. Because if they can take New York, especially with this major Jewish community in New York, which part of it is actually will vote for Mamdani, for them it is a proof that they are on the right path in order to Islamize the entire world.
So what I mean, it is, there's two questions. One would be how will New Yorkers see their lives change and their liberties change, their culture change after the election? And two, and the most obvious question, I guess, is why would the second largest Jewish population in the world, I mean, after Israel, be voting for Mandami? It just seems so counterintuitive, especially because on top of being a devout Muslim, he's also an openly communist person.
Well, uh, I think that the Jewish community is sharply divided between the majority, which does not like him to be the mayor, and the small minority which would vote for him. Look, I have friends who definitely would put themselves on the left side of the political map, but they are, let's say, grown ups. They are 60, 70 years old. They understand the problem, they understand the challenge, and they understand the threat to New York in general, to America also in general, and for the economy in New York in particular. And they are definitely against him, although they are in the left. The problem is with the youngsters, those who feel much less committed to the Jewish cause, feel much less committed to their being Jews, mostly liberal, young kids, and they don't make this deep calculations about what can happen to New York. They don't see things as we see, the olders. We see things from the maybe from the economic point of view. Businesses will run away. All these things. They see everything from the loop of the prices of, let's say, rent, food, which they have to pay. And if somebody comes and even baselessly promises them to lower the prices of rent and food, they will definitely run after him, just like the kids after the Pied Piper of Hamlet. So this is actually what happens in my humble view, but yet I'm not that expert about New York in general and the Jewish community in New York in particular. Although I do come frequently to speak in New York and other places in the U.S., yet I really cannot understand the fact that these people fell in love with a guy who is sponsored by Qatar, which sponsors everything against Jews and Muslim and pro the Muslim Brotherhood. Um, I really have no explanation for this self-sacrificing Jewish phenomenon, which we see unfortunately in other places as well, but in New York as we see it today.
Well, actually, this next question might speak to that. So there's been a great deal of historical whitewashing of Islamic history in the past few decades, up to and including Saudi funding of revisionist history. We see that in terms of concepts like the golden age of Spain and so on, which is a complete myth, of course. Most Europeans and North Americans are not even aware of their own champions who fought to resist Islamic invasion. People like Charles Martel or Vlad Tepes or El Cid and the martyrs of Otranto, who were recently canonized by the two popes ago for defending Europe against Islamic invasion. Jan Sobieski, I mean, I could go on. But for some reason, it doesn't seem like Europeans or North Americans, they've been memory old. Do you think that has something to do with Islam's current success in taking over the West? And why do you think that happened?
Well, there are some, I would say, accumulating reasons, especially what happens in Europe. First of all, the sharp decline of the European demography. Uh, it started with the two vicious um, world wars, which I think like 80 million Europeans got killed in both the First World War and the Second World War, let alone the 6 million Jews. But many Europeans, Germans, French, British, and many others got killed in these two wars. So the European population is already in deficit because of these wars. Secondly, after the Second World War, with all the slogans of human rights and women's rights, and of course the contraceptives which were developed after the Second World War, the European demography is in another decline because of the low birth rate. You see everywhere, almost in Western Europe, birth rate is less than two kids per woman. And in order for a society, any society, to remain as a society, every woman has to bring to the world 2.1 in average children. And today, the average in Western Europe is 1.4, 1.2. In Russia, it's 1.0 in Russia. So they their demography is in decline. So they need foreign workers in order to work in all kinds of professions which the Europeans do not want to work in. Europeans want to be lawyers, accountants, media people, artists, politicians, and high tech workers. That's more or less the professions within the Europeans. Who will be the people who work in grocery stores? Who will be the taxi drivers? Who will be the truck drivers? Who will dig in the mines? Who will work in blue collar uh, um, factories and so forth? And these are all migrants, and you can definitely see it in cities which are, let's say, industrial cities like Rotterdam in the Netherlands, which has a Islamic majority already, I think, like 25 years already then. So this is they are addicted to this migration. They cannot sustain their economy without the migration, and most of the migrants are not being merged or assimilated to the society. On the contrary, they remain what they were, although they might speak French or German, yet they do not become German or French. They don't adopt the state thinking. They don't even present themselves as French because French is a culture. They don't want to be associated with this culture, which is permissive, to most of them, which is materialistic to most of them, and they don't want to be associated with this. Yes, they want to live in France, but not to live as French. Although there is a minority which definitely assimilates, but this is the only minority. So this is what happens in Europe when the countries or the states become more and more Islamic, and those Muslims who migrate to Europe, they consider themselves as the masters of Europe. And this is the problem in this Islamic mindset. You migrate not from your homeland, you migrate to your homeland. So now France and Germany and Britain are considered their homelands, although they originally came from the Islamic world. So this is from their side. Don't forget that there is some more elements which worked in favor of migration, which is, in addition to the demography, the post-colonial discourse, in which I think I talked about the 80s into the 90s. Europeans talked about their sins against the oppressed nations which they colonized through the 18th, 19th century, especially the Muslims. So now they have to compensate them by allowing them to migrate in big numbers to those countries which colonized them formerly in Africa and Asia, and many of them are Islamic countries. Another thing is that the human rights uh, religion, which took Europe over, says that you cannot send back anyone who comes to seek asylum or seek a better place to live in Europe. So millions of Muslims just cross the Mediterranean Sea from the south, from Libya, from Algeria, from Tunisia, from Morocco. And once they set their foot on an island which belongs to Europe, it is Lampedusa, right across the right in front of the Libyan shores, or in Ceuta or Melilla, the two Spanish enclaves in Morocco. And of course, those who succeed to cross the Mediterranean or other seas. And once they set their foot on the European soil, that you cannot anymore send them back. So millions took advantage of this European new law, which actually paralyzed the European ability to remain European. And so, if you add all these things together, you can understand why Europe became so, I would say, friendly to migrants, and the political correctness actually shut the mouths of everybody in order not to talk about this, because it's not politically correct to talk about the Muslims who take over, let alone what happened in Britain, that you can even be put in jail if you talk about this. Look at what happened to Tommy Robinson, who tried to warn the British, or Douglas Murray, who wrote about the strange death of Europe, highly recommended book. And this was a self-defeating strategy by the British to not to allow any criticism, because anyone who criticized the migration was depicted as this Islamophobe and racist and bigot and all these expressions. And now we need a diversity in the society, or to diversify the society. All this nonsense which they enveloped the migration in. Another thing in Europe, and this is something which might be also in the States, that once an Islamic group came to a place, everyone who wants to be elected to the parliament, the German, has to cater to those migrants, otherwise they will not vote for him. Means the politicians, those who want to stay in power, and those who want to replace them, they are actually competing with each other. Who will give the migrants more benefits? And if they are competing with each with each other, who is the benefactor? Of course, the migrants, because they juggle between this and this, and whoever will give them more will be elected. So this is, I would say, the betrayal of the European politicians, how they betrayed their own societies in order to be re-elected or to be elected. So these are some of the reasons how why Europe became so much influenced by Islam. And since the war in Gaza started, those minorities came to the streets and demonstrated, and actually saw that they can, to a degree that even the French domestic intelligence issued a report about the Muslim Brotherhood in France. And one of the ways to appease this organization is to recognize the Palestinian state, um, instead, in spite of Israeli objection. So this, in order to appease them. However, it doesn't work, because every week there is at least one church in France being torched to the ground. And my heart tells me that even the fire in the Notre Dame was not caused by electric short or some lightning. It was deliberately set by somebody who doesn't like churches, And maybe you can even combine it to the stealth of the things from the Louvre, like a week ago. Again, by people who want to fight against the symbols of France, whether it's religious symbols like Notre Dame or the empire symbols which were stolen from the Louvre. All of them are meant to fight the French culture, the French heritage, and the French nature of France in order to replace it by Islam. Even if they don't admit, this is how they feel. And for them, the permissiveness and the materialism of Europe should be ended because in Islam, all these things are totally forbidden. At least that's what they say. And replacement of the Christians in Europe is considered to be a very good deed in Islam because, according to their, I would say, mindset of the jihad, and this kind of jihad, jihad is meant in order to make the word of Allah superior and the word of the infidels inferior. And by burning them, by stealing them, and by forcing them to recognize a Palestinian state, it means all that the word of Allah becomes more and more powerful in these countries on the expense of the local people.
Thank you. So, since the October 7 attack, there has been, I mean, for many, many years now, I don't know, 15, 20 years or more, there have been occasional demonstrations across cities across the Western world, which are usually a combination of communists or far leftists, let's say communist adjacent, and Muslims protesting Israel and protesting the nation state as a whole, the existence of the nation state. But since October 7 a couple of years ago, those protests are almost daily. They're far bigger, far more destructive, far better financed, and far better planned. You can tell by the uniformity in the signage, or that suddenly hundreds of people are staying in similar tents on college campuses. I mean, so my question to you would be, to most people, this alliance between communists and Islam would seem to be unlikely. Why would those two apparently opposite ideologies and philosophies be allying against against the Western world, and in particular, it seems, against Israel?
Well, look, there what's called the Red and Green Alliance between the communists and the Islamists. Although they are far away from each other culturally, yet they have one shared goal, is to F the system. Everyone, each from its own direction, and they are actually, both are working with the logic that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So this is what actually makes this alliance between the communists and the Islamists. Both want to destroy the system. And don't forget, the system actually is made by the banks, the money, and the political influence, and the media, and the Jewish people who are in all these industries, as they think. And the Jews are actually protected by the system, by the law. So, in order to F the system, you have to F the Jews. So, this is how the combination between the red and the green. Add to this the two kinds of Jew hatred, which we definitely see. On one side, we see the European, Western, I would say, Christian heritage of Jew hatred in Western countries, today combined with Eastern, Arab, Islamic Jew hatred, which migrates to Europe, and both kinds of Jew hatred from the East and from the West, now they are together, and together they are actually enforcing each other and strengthening each other. And therefore, these two sentiments are being again combined with a red and green alliance. So either you take it as an economic issue, or a systemic issue, or political issue, or religious issue, or historic issue. All of them together are the salad of what's called today the Jew hatred. And since the government protects the Jews because the Jews are citizens, you have to have the government as well. So here you are. This is actually what happens today. And Qatar, and I think Qatar today is the main um, economic engine behind all these things. They discovered this sentiment against Jews, and since all Jews are suspected to be, at least most of them, are Israel supporters, so pouring money over Jew hatred in diaspora is actually meant to weaken Israel as well. And for Qatar, anything which will weaken Israel is okay. And this is why they sponsor organizations like CARE, which in the United States supports organizations like MSA, Muslim Student Association, which is behind many of the activities, against Israel. Add to this SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, again, anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist organization. And I think that they also sponsored JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, which too many members there are carrying names like Muhammad and Ahmad and Mustafa and Abir, Jewish Voice for Peace. And I believe that this organization also is sponsored, at least partially, by Qatar. This is what I suspect. And Qatar found out all these organizations can serve the main goal of the Muslim Brotherhood, which they wholeheartedly support, to get rid of the state of Israel altogether. By cutting the support from Israel, by cutting the support for Israel from many echelons, either political echelons, media echelons, public echelons like Jewish organizations. And therefore, they are investing so much money in the United States of America, in addition to Europe, in order to weaken all those who support Israel.
Also, you mentioned in a previous answer that the Muslims who are migrating west want to destroy the financial system and they want to create a global ummah. So, both the idea of destroying borders and of destroying the financial system would be suitable and agreeable to communists as well. So, I guess in a way, the communists and Muslims are actually a lot closer ideologically than people might imagine, religiosity notwithstanding. So there is an activist named Sami Hamdi. Have you heard of him? Are you aware of him?
I'm not sure.
Sami Hamdi. He's a Muslim activist and in the United States, and he in a lengthy video that he recently did explained it. I can play you the clip if you like, but he was claiming that Islamic anti-Semitism isn't really a thing, and that in fact historically the Jews had begged the Muslims to save them, I guess from Christians. Did you want to speak to that claim, or?
Look, first of all, no doubt when you compare life of Jews in Europe, mainly in Eastern Europe, and the life of Jews in the Arab and Islamic world, there is no way to compare. The persecution of Jews in Eastern Europe and Western as well, or Central Europe, was tremendous. Look, Germany, Poland, blood libels, which we saw through many years, and let alone the Holocaust, which happened in Europe. The life of Jews in the Islamic world traditionally, or historically, were much better. Apparently, because Muslims are not that efficient as the Germans are, for example. So this is one of the reasons. But Definitely, Jews lived historically much better life, although there were cases of, let's say, forcing Jews to embrace Islam. It was in Cordoba, in Morocco, where the family of Maimonides ran away from Cordoba to Morocco. There was a sect of the Muwahideen who were controlling Morocco those days. I'm talking about the 12th century, and they actually forced Jews to convert to Islam. So the Maimonides family ran away to Egypt, where they felt much safer. In Persia, in Mashhad, in the 19th century, there was also a campaign of forcing Jews to embrace Islam. We had blood libel in Damascus in the 19th century. Yes, there was uh, problems in Yemen. Every kid who was an orphan, both boys and girls, should have been handed to the imam, even if he was Jewish. So, let alone all kinds of other kinds of persecution. But if you compare what happened in the Islamic world to what happened in Europe through the centuries, definitely Europe was much worse. So there is some kind of truth in this saying. However, and here comes the however. People keep saying that, oh, in Spain, as the Muslims call Andalusia, life of Jews were gold. They were prominent Jews who felt very free, and they could the literature, the Jewish art, and everything was. This is the deception, because only as long as Jews lived as dhimmis, means people who are living under the yoke of Islam, pay the jizya, means the head tax, and obey the orders of Islam of humiliation, to be humiliated, as it said in the Quran, they live normal life. Once Jews started to look for a place for themselves, to have sovereignty over their ancestors' land, like the land of Israel. Oh, this is something which is totally against Islam. And here is the problem. The Muslims, at least the radical Muslims, do not consider Israel to be a legitimate state at all, to begin with, because of accumulative reasons. The first reason is that the Jewish religion is viewed as din batil, means religion of falsehood, or religion, cancelled religion, just like Christianity, because in their view, they Islam replaced Christianity, which replaced Judaism. Means Judaism is replaced twice, once by Christianity 2,000 years ago, and the second time is by Islam in the 7th century. So, since there is no Jewish religion, why do we need a Jewish state? The second problem is the land. The land of Israel is considered by Muslims as an Islamic waqf, means a holy endowment, which belongs to all the Muslims in the world ever since the Islamic occupation. And in addition, according to the Islamic Sharia, every land which was once occupied by Islam should remain under the Islamic rule forever. Therefore, Spain or the Iberian Peninsula should return to be Islamic. The island of Sicily should return to be Islamic. This land should return to be Islamic. Large parts of the Balkans, all the way up to the gates of Vienna, should return to be Islamic, because once the Muslims ruled over them. So, who has the authority to take a land out of Islam and give it to the Jews? What, Balfour, the evangelical Christian minister of foreign affairs in 1917? Who the heck gave him this land to give it to the Jews? So they don't consider the legitimacy of the state of Israel on this country, because this country is an Islamic country. Third problem is that, according to their interpretation, there is no Jewish nation, because Jews are only sects or communities which belong to all the nations in the world. A Jew in America is an American. who happened to be Jew. A Jew in Iraq is an Iraqi Arab who happened to be Jew, just like other Iraqis who are Muslims, Christians, or whatever they are. A Jew in Morocco is a Moroccan Arab who happened to be Jewish, just like his neighbors who are Muslims. And so forth in Russia. A Jew in Russia is a Russian national who, embraced Judaism just like other Russians who are Muslims and Christians. So this is how they see the Jewish religion. We are not a nation. We are communities, and we should return to all the communities which we came from during the 20th century, and live there because we are not a nation. And since we are not a nation, we don't need a state. The fourth problem is that anyway, Jews should live under the yoke of Islam as dhimmis, and this is to be humiliated all the time. A Jew and a Christian, by the way, cannot ride a horse, only a donkey, in order to belittle them. A Jew and a Christian have to walk in the sewage canal in the center of the streets because in the Middle Ages, the sewage canal had not only what comes out from the bathrooms, but not only from the kitchens, also from the bathrooms of the households around it. So the Jew and the Christian should walk in this filth in order to humiliate them. And many more things which show that Jew and a Christian are inferior, while Islam is superior, which actually is a very important goal for the jihad. So, if you combine all these things together, the Jewish religion doesn't exist. This land is Islamic. Jews are not a nation, and anyway, they should live under the Islamic yoke. If you combine them together, the bottom line is that Israel as a Jewish state has absolutely no reason to exist. And the mere existence of the state of Israel is a threat on Islam, is a theological challenge, which they cannot fathom, they cannot accept. Because everything which Israel is against Islam, against the idea of Islam, against of the idea of replacement of Islam replaced Judaism and Christianity. And therefore, Israel has absolutely no right to exist. And whoever fights against Israel is actually performs the jihad in its best way in order to save Islam from the resurrection of Judaism in the form of state, army, police, government, and whatever the state is. They cannot accept the mere existence of the state of Israel, and all the Israelis are occupiers. The soldiers are occupiers. The lady soldiers are also occupiers. The men and women are parents of the soldiers. The grandpa and grandma of the soldiers. The boys and the girls will grow up to be soldiers. This is why all the Israelis are legitimate targets, as we saw on October 7, 2023, how they indiscriminately attacked boys and girls and raped and burnt and babies and dreadful deeds what they did on that day. Yet everything is okay because all the Israelis are occupiers. Even the half a year old babies, they should be put in the oven in order to be burned to death in front of their parents' eyes, who were forced to see this dreadful scene, and then we get killed. And this is how these ISIS like fighters of Hamas, how they behave and how they treated the people near Gaza on October 7th. And everything which they did is alongside with the Islamic thought. And because, according to the Quran, there is a verse which says, and prepare against them, against the infidels, or against the enemies. Prepare against them whatever you have from power and bound horses in order to strike terror, to strike fear into the hearts of your enemies and the enemies of Allah. This is the verse in the Quran. So how do you strike terror or fear into the hearts of your infidel or of the infidels? You do to them all kinds of atrocities, as they did on October 7th, and upload it to Telegram in order to show the whole world what you can do and what you will do to them if they don't subjugate to Islam peacefully. And this is what was there. And we have to carry it in mind.
So would you say then that the attack on October 7 and the atrocities committed within that attack were completely legitimized within Islamic thought, within Islamic law, within Islamic culture?
It is a part, indivisible part of the Islamic modus operandi, which is stated very well in the Islamic books of history, how they occupied India, how they occupied the space which is today Sindh, which is part of Pakistan. Massacres everywhere, mass killing everywhere. This is their books of history, not others. And they describe it very, proudly in order to show themselves or their children how to behave in order to push Islamic rule over other countries. Yet, many Muslims do not share it. Many Muslims who were, civil, you know, got their civil thoughts or civil concepts from the West. They studied in university, they studied in school, high schools. They actually internalized Western ideas, Western values, I would even say, of human rights, of political freedoms, women's rights, and all these things which might have do something against the savagery which we saw on October 7th. Yet they are a minority in the Islamic world. They are people who would definitely get rid of the radical view of Islam because they are the victims of the radical Islam before others. And they know it. Because if any girl goes around in the street without a hair veil, she actually puts herself in danger from these jihadists. If I would say a lady goes in a car with a man who is not her husband, she is in very big danger because of these people, because they don't see it as something which should be done, and many more things which definitely show that these people are actually taking over the Islam. Why? Because those are violent. And those who are, let's say, liberal, modern, are in most cases unarmed. And in any discourse between an unarmed party versus an armed party, always the armed party will win. Always the armed party will prevail, and always the unarmed party will fail.
So that sounds quite reasonable. If I were to, I have to say that I feel like you have really lucidly and brilliantly explained that there is a fundamental different system of thought between Islamic thought and Western thought. What you've described is that the motives, intentions, that the fundamentals of the thinking of Islam are so far away from Western, let's say, Socratic and Aristotelian thinking, that clearly there can't be any kind of détente or any kind of reasoned solution in terms of these two cultures coexisting, because one has obviously a core set of principles that they must dominate, they must rule, they must tyrannically be in control of all other people, all other systems of organization, all other cultures, and certainly other religions. So if that is correct, and it seems to be what I'm hearing, what would you say is the right course of action for the Western world, and for that matter, any part of the world which enjoys its own history, its own culture, and its own identity?
Look, first of all, I would say stop the migration. Stop the migration. No, no doubt. You have to put an end to this. This is my first thing. Second thing, bring children to the world. Start making babies, because any society which doesn't bring babies in a rate of 2.1 per woman, is actually walks proudly into the museum. And I'm not sure that the people of today wants to be, part of the museum. So, second thing, bring children to the world in order to replace those, and that you don't need so many migrants in order to run the economy. Third, stop with this nonsense of political correctness. Start talking about the reality. And if the reality is that Muslims are the main group of rapists in Western Europe, you have to expose it, you have to show it, you have to deal with this. You cannot run around with a face that I never knew about this. So, definitely, uh, measures can be taken. This Look, Japan, as much as I heard, doesn't allow Islamic migration and doesn't allow mosques, doesn't allow anything, which makes the Islamic group there into something which can be considered as a community. There are places in the world which know how to fight it, especially by keeping it outside. If this is one town, it's one town. It moves from place to place. You don't solve the problem. Just export it to other towns. Yet, I think that the world should do whatever necessary in order to keep itself. Otherwise, it's the end of the Western societies. It's the end of the Western culture. And something which was nicely built during the last 250 years, like democracies, liberalism, will definitely deteriorate and be dismantled by the Islamist ideas in migration.
A number of years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago, maybe, I saw a video from Israel, from I think Gaza and perhaps from Judea, Samaria, where they showed a lot of Muslim organizations that were operating crushers, and they would dig up any artifact that showed Israeli or Jewish history and destroy it, whether it was coins or clay pots or anything from the past, and they would deracinate any non-Islamic history from the region, which I think is actually in keeping with Islamic principles altogether. The idea of jahiliyyah, or I'm probably saying it wrong, but the idea that anything that existed before Islam dominated an area was from the time of ignorance and had to be destroyed. If I have that right, then we would not even be committing ourselves to the museum, because museums are a Western idea and there will not be museums.
Look, in my humble view, in less than 100 years, the Islamic population of Europe, which with the majority, will have cages in the zoos, and in each and every one cage there will be a couple of blonde people with the blue eyes to show the people how once the Homo eropos would look like, blonde with blue eyes. Uh, Otherwise, all the others will be assimilated.
Assimilated at best. Mordechai Kedar, I just can't thank you enough. You've given us a tremendous amount of your very valuable time.
Let
I
me
know
just
that you.
comment. Let's just say something very
Mhm.
important for the dear Americans. The Atlantic Ocean is not wide enough to keep America safe from the same problem or same problems which Europe suffers from because of the migration. If you Americans don't get your act together against the migration, your fate will just look at Europe today is what you're going to get in America. Because what you see today in America is what we saw in Europe 15 years ago when Islam started to come and to organize itself in universities and so forth. If you want to know how America might look like, look at Europe today. If you don't watch it, if you don't keep your borders shut, if you don't, if you if you allow this migration to come to America, in 15 years, you will see what happens in Europe today. And this is my message to the American people. And your survival is the world's survival. Just think about this. Thank you so much.